Okay, you are now the host.
Let's see if I can screen share. Oh, beautiful.
What a wonderful surname you have.
Yes, yes.
That's a pretty good surname. That's pretty cool, Bob.
And my wife is a psychotherapist, and
Oh, even better.
but she didn't take my name when we got married, and all
Oh my
all her
gosh.
colleagues were like, why?
My brother's name is Paul Newman, by the way.
Ah,
My name
gosh.
is Newman, so
Wow.
these very interesting names.
Yeah, but, wow. But yeah, I'm thinking Freud. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Growing up, our high school teachers called me, my brother, and my sister. Everyone was called Sig. That was the nickname.
Yeah. Yes. When you were actually destined to marry a psychotherapist, quite clearly.
Apparently,
that was in the
yes.
stars. Yeah.
Oh. Oh, Corinne, you're a social worker originally, right?
I was, yes.
Okay. How long have you been in Israel?
Nearly 5 years. 5 years in November.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting ride.
I'm sure, especially with the corona,
Yeah, it's across the world though. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know where we're all going. I think we're all in a tunnel at the moment. We're all in this tunnel and we're going towards an opening, but I'm not quite sure what's going to be on the other side.
Yeah. Way of putting it. Well, hopefully, a lot of terrible things have happened, but some good has come out of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Some of the Zoom, there's Zoom fatigue, of course, but
Absolutely.
some of the Zoom training has been wonderful.
Well, I'm still a bit of a, in my infancy with this, I have to say. Yeah, I'm trying to get to grips with it all, but it's funny because the generations are like, I never grew up with this, and then the generation before just has a better grasp, it seems to me. And then you've got your millennials and the people now who just look at me like I'm some kind of idiot, which is probably true.
And then my mom's generation, I did a little bit on a internet program about Ladino the other day.
Okay.
And I sent it to my mom, and she's like, "But what channel is it on?" I'm like, "No, it's streaming. What's streaming?" It's like,
yeah, oh, that's right. A woman after my own heart. Absolutely.
and then after she got no satisfaction from me, she called my sister. But what channel is it on? Oh, bless her heart. Although she's 90, and her boyfriend had to show it to her on his computer.
I like it.
Yeah, no, she's wonderful.
Anyway.
So I think we can start, Bob.
Okay. Well, I don't know if Beth is watching on Facebook, but if you are, Beth, hello. And if you're not, we're here. So today, what I want to talk about is working with students with their writing. And Corinne, tell me just a little bit about the student that you're working with.
I've got two students. I decided I'm a bit of a crazy, but I thought I would actually take two. Mm-hmm. One is intermediate, and I would actually say she's actually quite high intermediate, mm-hmm. And a very intelligent young woman. And the one that I'm having tonight, actually after this, is a beginner, mm-hmm. And is much is in the infancy, I think. I'm not confident on the Zoom. I've just got to the point of sharing the screen and writing, mm-hmm. But both are actually quite challenging in their own different ways, actually.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think actually I was a social worker, mm-hmm. and I did a lot of I was a social worker arranging adoption of children for 22 years. So I did a lot of adult training. But I've really found explaining grammar, like, oh my God, you know, we speak the language, but we don't understand it. And on Sunday, I had my high intermediate, and she's asking such really good questions. So, you know, the Israelis really struggle with the verb to be, because there is no verb to be. So I'm trying to take her back, because her vocabulary is excellent, really. She's got a good command, but it's just those little holes, you know, like the washing line, just the spaces between the pegs that actually she needs to work on. So I'm going back to the present simple and the present progressive. And so we're looking like, I am going to bed after this lesson. So she'll say to me, well, why isn't it, I will go to bed? And I'm thinking, okay, right, good question. What the bloody hell's the answer?
And in truth, Corinne, there actually are answers to those questions, but they're outside the scope of what you're going to be able to come up with. What we may do at some point, you know, we'll talk with Marla, is we could do a crash course in the grammar for teachers that students actually need, because there are lots of real good answers, but the answers are so fine-grained. For example, the word the and the articles. There are 9 basic rules for using these, and there are 50 exceptions. Newspapers take the, like the New York Times. Magazines don't. Time Magazine. Buildings take the Empire State Building. Halls, Carnegie Hall don't. And so on and so on. And so when students say why is not really the right question, but the answer is, what does English do? And as a native speaker, you know exactly what they need to do, but you're gonna wind up in the weeds if you start in right now on the why. So let me share my screen.
Sure.
And I am going to, and this is my first time doing screen sharing, so it's a learning experience.
Don't worry, it's me, Bob. Don't worry.
No, we're taping this, so it's going out to all over the world, including my mom, I think.
Oh gosh.
Okay. Well, that's not working, but.
On the bottom, are you clicking screen share?
Oh, yeah, no, it's actually the program that I want to share. There we are. Give me a second here. Okay, can you see something that says writing?
Yes, I can, Bob.
Okay, so this is kind of where I want to go today. We're not going to cover all of it, but it's kind of the basic territory. I want to talk a little bit about correction, because that seems to be what teachers do a lot of. I want to talk about whether correction actually works, and what happens when teachers correct, and maybe how to correct, and then what kind of practice can you do with a student to help them overcome certain problems? So, sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So, we are going to take a look. Did you have a chance to take a look at that writing that I sent to you?
I did.
Okay. And we're going to go to, if I have it queued up here. This is me talking with a student, talking about the writing.
Okay.
And the student here is a pretty advanced student. She has an American boyfriend or husband, I forget which, partner. And her spoken English is really very good. But as she told me, she just writes down whatever the way she speaks. So here I am taking a look at the first part of what I sent you.
Yes.
Okay, let me know that you can see the screen.
I can.
I think we're recording. Let me make sure.
Yeah, it's recording.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we've gone up.
Okay, so Lily, we're going to take a look at your writing. It was really interesting for me. I had no idea that Amazon was doing this kind of thing. Okay. And so one of the first points here is that a lot of teachers are so fixated on correcting the student's grammar and the language that they forget to respond to what the student wrote. So with everything a student writes for me, before I ever get to a verb tense or this or that, I want to respond to the content of what they wrote. I want to encourage them. I want to say, wow, this is awesome. And so I've said, you know, I had no idea. I learned something from what you wrote. So writing is about communication. It's not just an exercise that the student does for the teacher.
So the first thing I'm going to say is that this is not a complain letter. Complain's the verb. This is actually a complaint.
Complaint? I never heard it.
And this is the first time. So,
and so here, this is news to Lily, this whole noun, verb for certain words. You know, it's brand new.
a person, you can say, I complain, but a person, you make a complaint. So complain is the verb, and complaint is the noun. Okay. So Amazon, one of the largest companies in the world. Why don't you read that sentence for me? Read the next sentence.
Okay, and so here, instead of my correcting everything, which is kind of the traditional model, student writes something, teacher scribbles in red all over it, student says, wow, I'm so dumb, my teacher's so smart. The research on this kind of error correction shows that although students expect it, very little learning actually takes place. That students are not able to use the written corrections that teachers give them to actually change their own language. Usually in a classroom situation where you've got 15, 20 students, you don't really have the luxury of doing anything else. Because you're in a one-to-one teaching situation, you do have the luxury of what we call writing conferences, where you and the student talk through the paper. Again, it's marvelous because the research has shown us this is where change actually happens. So maybe first point here is student writes something, don't correct it. You'll definitely want to look it over, but don't correct it beforehand and give it back to the student. Instead, you're going to work with the paper with the student. And you're going to want as much as possible for the correction to come from the student. So let's see what else Lily has to say. So I've asked Lily, she's got Amazon have.
Have millions of customers.
Start from the beginning.
Amazon, one of the largest companies in the world, have millions of customers and companies' employees.
Okay, so you see a mistake there?
For sure I have.
What's the subject of the sentence?
And because Lily's an advanced student, I'm happy to say what's the subject. But if I were working with a much more basic student, I might say what's the first noun, and probably a little bit of grammar words like noun and verb and adjective are good to use. But if we're an elementary student, I might not talk about subject. We might just say what's the first noun here in the sentence?
Amazon.
Right, exactly. What's the verb? Have. Would you say Amazon have or Amazon has?
Has. Sounds correct.
So again, over here, this is not something which Lily has internalized. She's got really, really great communicative skills, but something like I have, you have, if it's not new to her, it's something which she doesn't use very, very fluently.
Yeah, well, because Amazon is only one thing. Do you say Israel have or Israel has?
Has.
Do you say Danny have or Danny has? You don't know. So whenever I say he or she,
I think Danny has.
yeah. Whenever I say he or she or it, we're not gonna say have. Instead, we're gonna use has because it's one thing.
Now, what I'm using here is I'm using Google Docs. Corinne, do you ever use Google Docs?
Well, this is what I'm trying to get my head round. I've actually now looked at a couple of tutorials, and Marla very kindly actually asked Stephanie D'Souza to help me, and I'm still not on it, to be honest. I've created a couple, but I don't know how to share the damn thing. Excuse my language. So I'm still, as I say, a complete virgin at this thing. So yeah.
This is one of the things. I don't believe in people learning all kinds of bells and whistles and software to teach, but Google Docs is marvelous because you can't do this on the whiteboard in Zoom. But if I click share, and then I write in my student's name, my student gets a message, you've got a document to share, and then the student and I can look at this in real time together, and that's what's happening here. I'm on Google Docs, Lily's on Google Docs, we're talking through it, she's seeing the corrections I'm making, I'm taking some of the suggestions she's making, we're working on the document together. So Google Docs, especially for working with writing, is going to be your friend. Let's see what else happens here.
It has millions of customers, and we're not going to say company employees. We're going to say not company's employees, but company employees. But that sounds a little funny, because doesn't every employee work for a company? I think I'm just going to say millions of customers and employees.
So I'm not necessarily, there's a point here that I want her to see, but I don't want to teach this point. But I am going to talk it through. And there'll be something that comes up in the back of her head, and we're going to see this again. Maybe not in this lesson, but in the next lesson. So not everything that I correct do I necessarily have to teach. And I don't necessarily have to correct everything either.
Okay, read me the next one.
According to an article.
Good.
That I read about Amazon. Basically, Amazon meeting with different startups as a potential investor.
So Corinne, let me throw this back to you now. What would you do with this sentence?
Yeah. Well, quite clearly, she's got a lot of vocabulary. It's a bit resonant of the student I've got.
Mm-hmm.
She's actually slipping in words that she knows. So she's got a good command of the vocabulary. The issue is how she's using it. So actually, I think actually asking her to read it is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
But then maybe I might ask her to think of another way to say it. I might ask her what she's trying to say, and then ask her to reframe it a little, I think.
Absolutely. And it's really important to ask students, what are they trying to say here? One of my biggest ahas in teaching writing came a few years ago. And I was working with a student with their paper. And I said to the student, what do you mean by this sentence? I really don't understand. And the student said, I don't know what I mean. I put this down. I was hoping you would figure out what I meant.
Yeah.
But in this sense, there's a pretty clear problem. According to an article that I read about Amazon basically, so if I were putting it in teacher speak, she doesn't have a subject. She needs to put a comma after Amazon, and then she needs to have a subject. So let's see what I do here.
So it's really interesting what you did. You kind of changed what you read because you knew you were missing something. According to an article that I read about Amazon,
and so again, that's the other reason for reading it out loud. A lot of times, when I'm working in one of my foreign languages too, there are mistakes that I'll make, and I don't catch them. But if I read them out loud, I'm going to catch them. So I don't necessarily have to assume that every mistake the student makes is a mistake the student isn't aware of.
Separate that into two parts. So if I even kind of forgot about this part, because this is just like an introduction. So you have a sentence that starts with a verb, but you don't have a subject. Basically meaning, who's meeting? Amazon, right? Amazon is.
Is. No, I was mixing is.
No, you were missing the second Amazon. You said, according to an article I read about Amazon. So if I got rid of that thing entirely, you just said this, basically meeting. Who's meeting? Amazon. What does it mean, basically meeting? Maybe they're just meeting.
Yeah. Like I told you the last time also, I'm writing the way I'm talking. So when I talk, I say basic.
And so especially for a more advanced student like Lily, the message that I eventually want to get across to her is that writing is not just putting down spoken English. And as Lily and I, if we were to work through this 4, 5, 6 different weeks, I'd ask her the same questions again. You know, why are you saying they're basically meeting? Or why did you put, in my opinion, I think? Well, we just take that part out for an opinion piece. And so I'm setting up cues that later on, this is only one piece of one little lesson, but I'm setting up cues that I'm going to use with her again and again, the kinds of questions that I'm asking her. Now we know the spelling. Israeli students, the stereotype, and there's a tremendous amount of truth in this. Terrible spelling. Hebrew doesn't have the same kind of vowels that English has. Yeah. I don't know. Have you been learning Hebrew?
Yes, I mean, I would say I'm intermediate on a good day, probably upper intermediate on a better day.
Mm-hmm.
But my reading and writing is absolutely terrible, absolutely dreadful. My spelling doesn't go before me, but I can get by. I can have more than a basic conversation. I would say that plus to Gimel in conversation, but actually in writing and reading, pants.
Yeah, me too with my Hebrew as well. So one of the things I want to do, that I want the student to do with her spelling, is keep a spelling list, because it's not that the student is going to spell 5,000 different words wrong, but she's going to probably spell the same 127 words wrong again and again. And if she can master 80% different, that's a really high frequency word.
Yeah.
So I'm going to note it. I'm not going to do too much with it. But I'm going to say, hey, you know, let's mark the spelling words. Let's keep a list. Next time, go back to your list.
And I do the same thing. When I write, I just write down what I'm thinking, and then I go back and I say, is this really what I mean?
Yeah.
When you write, don't worry about the grammar, the spelling. Okay. Speaking of spelling, so spell check is your friend. So different. What would be good?
Spell check is their friend, but Google Translate is not necessarily their friend.
No.
So I'm sure you know, you want to encourage the student not to make Google Translate their first resort.
Yeah.
If you keep a spelling list for yourself, just words that you spelled wrong and the right spelling. So I'd even just put a notebook and I'd put your spelling and then the right spelling, because it's not that you're spelling 1,000 different words wrong. It's just like the same 27 words wrong.
Wow, it's the same thing I just said to you. It's the same shtick.
Again and again. So different. Okay, Amazon is meeting with different startups as a potential investor. Okay, keep going.
So the company is sharing with them the secret of their product.
Okay. Now we just don't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So the company, which company? Is it Amazon or?
And I could have explained here, you don't need so because there's no result. It's not a result clause, but that wasn't going to add value here. So sometimes I'm just going to say, yeah, let's take this out.
Yeah. No, we're talking about Amazon.
Right, we're also talking about other companies. Amazon, so the startup, so it would be better for me if you said the startups, because otherwise I'm confused. Which companies, Amazon or the other guys? The startup. So you were talking about startups, many of them, and now you're going to one startup. It's probably better if you either say the startups, because it's not just one of them, right?
Yeah.
Are sharing with them the secrets of their product. So over here, the word order is wrong. So they're sharing the secrets of their product with them. So you have to move the them. Okay. And let's, I want to see what it is that we want to correct. So there's an awful lot of things in the world that we could correct. If we go over here, so I'm going to be putting a handout together, but here's a basic list of the things that I might correct with a student paper, especially a student intermediate advanced, and other things I'd probably leave alone. So singular plural, big bugaboo of most students, not just Israeli students, but students all over the world. Okay, he have been here for 6 months. So very often the student, if you talk through it with the student, can find out, oh yeah, he has 6 months. How many months? 1 month or 6 months? And you don't need to write this. I'll send you a copy of this handout. Word form. English, like Hebrew, has noun, verb, adjective. And when students learn a word, they need to learn the correct verb form. Sometimes it's just the wrong word. And I don't want to do much more than say, instead of saying on the taxi, let's put into the taxi. Maybe later on, we're going to talk about prepositions, but here. Verb tense in English, like in the Hebrew verb tense system to me, what was it, Binyamin?
Binyan.
Yeah, that's kind of a nightmare. The English verb tense system, we have 12 tenses in English, 11 of which we use, 1 of which we almost never use. And many of the verb tenses have 5 different meanings. So the best thing that you can do at this point is, yeah, we're not going to use this tense, we're going to use another tense. And it does help at a certain point to learn, well, when do we use the present perfect? What does present perfect mean in English? Yeah. And a lot of times we kind of think, if we're educated native speakers, that we know grammar, but we really don't. We kind of we know editing. I want to show the student, hey, you left out a word here, number 5, or you need to take a word out here. Word order is a biggie. And so I may just correct the word order for the student, or I may say, hey, here's a word order mistake. What do you think it should be? Incomplete sentence is what we normally talk about, fragments. It's a broken sentence. And a lot of times a student has a preposition starting a phrase, and they think that's a sentence. But if they were to kind of hide the preposition, they'd say, oh, yeah, it's not really a sentence. I need something else. Spelling. Spelling, certainly. Again, the kind of spelling list I like students to keep is their own list, which has on one side of the page, and they can do this electronically, the way they spelled it incorrectly, and then on the other side, the correct spelling.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Punctuation beyond basic students, a lot of the basic punctuation, not a big problem here. Capitalization, however, there's some capitalization rules that I'm sure you're familiar with. Number 11, the articles. Again,
it seems like it should be really easy, but it's not. So until such point as you're able to kind of go over why we're using an article, it's important enough just to say, hey, this is the article mistake. Real quick mini lesson on the articles. If something in English is general, we don't say the. We never say the life is good. Many
No.
languages, if it's general, you put a the. English, if it's general, there's no the. If something is specific, I have to have an article. I can't say book, I have to say a book, the book, your book, my book. But there's more
I mean,
to
the only thing, I always think that it's the only way I can kind of try to explain is like, you know, the use of the word et, you know, in Hebrew. When you are talking about something specific, you use, you know, et habayit. I don't know whether that actually tallies to the specific.
It's not 100% overlap, but it's a good start. It's we use the if something is specific. We also, it's kind of a nice basic rule: first time, second time. Yesterday I bought a book. First time, the book was really interesting. And so that's a nice quick and dirty rule. But students, even advanced students, will probably continue to have article mistakes. Number 12, don't be afraid to use this one. I don't know what you mean here. The meaning is not clear. And then, as you suggested to me, Corinne, have the student try and tell you what it is they mean. The last one on this chart is a run-on sentence. And I think a lot of educated native speakers think a run-on sentence is a really long sentence, but it's not. It's not just a sentence that goes on and on and on. It's two sentences joined with a comma. John cried, comma, Mary died. English doesn't do that. A lot of languages do. And so my roommate was sleeping, comma, we didn't want to wake her up. It's worth for yourself, kind of, if you're not familiar with them, going over the rules for what a run-on sentence is.
Okay, that's helpful.
Let me stop here for a moment, and actually no, let me do one more thing. So, how do we help students with something like the have or the has? There's a technique called controlled composition, which is a fancy name for something which is really, really simple. Hopefully you can see my screen here.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. And what controlled composition does is you take a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs and you ask the student to change it in some way. So over here, what makes movies blockbusters? So what makes it difficult for Hollywood producers to predict which films will be blockbusters? So to practice the he and she, I'm going to ask the student to take this paragraph or this little article and put everything into the singular. And so now the student, and this is something the student does either with you or without you, and the student has to think through this in kind of a very, very orderly way, but I'm only asking the student to make one change. So go ahead.
Yeah.
If you were going to, let's say you're the student, take this paragraph and make everything singular. So instead of what makes movies blockbusters, I want you to say, what makes a movie a blockbuster?
A blockbuster. What makes a movie a blockbuster?
Keep going.
Yeah. What makes it so difficult for a Hollywood producer to predict which film will be a blockbuster and which will be a miserable flop?
And so over here, I'm helping the student work with third person. I'm helping the student work with using and the.
Yeah.
This is a wonderful book that was written, probably about 20 years ago and has been released for teachers to use. And there are, it's called 26 Steps. There are 26 different ways that the student might might change a paragraph. So I'll put a link to this in the materials that I send you.
Fantastic. No, that looks
yeah.
really good.
Oh,
That
it
looks really good.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So things are like changing he to she, changing singular to plural, plural to singular, taking something in the future, making it past, making it present. And it's great homework. It's great to do with the student in class. But this is the kind of grammar practice that I think really helps a student, make a difference. Okay, so I'm going to stop here.
Like actually what you're saying is what one does in creative writing, or what one should try to aim for is to show, not tell.
Absolutely.
And I think that's I've just, that's a bit of an aha moment for me, because actually I'm doing a bit of telling, and I know sometimes I'll get it right, and sometimes I'm thinking I don't understand that, so how can I expect somebody else to, if I don't even understand what I'm saying?
Mhm.
But this actually is a show, not tell.
Right, and that's where your strength as a native speaker is, in showing.
Yeah.
And so we all want to maximize our strengths. And so this covers the same problems, but yeah, it's brilliant. I love what you said. This is show, not tell, and this works. Let me see. We didn't really talk about writing assignments, but you want them as much as possible to come from the student.
Right.
And they should be motivating. There should be what we call an information gap. If you know this, don't ask students to write about things that you already know. If you know everything about them, don't ask them to write down everything that you know, but instead ask them something about them that you don't know, where they're communicating something new. Email is wonderful because with email, you get to work on tone, especially if you've got a more advanced student who's getting ready to work in some kind of professional environment. The student writes it, and there you can reformulate it for the student. You said, you put it this way, and this is how I'll.
Yeah. That's really good. That's really good. I love this 26 steps. I like that very much.
Bob seems to have frozen, Corinne. I'm not sure why.
Sorry?
Bob seems to have frozen.
Yeah,
I think his computer was running.
I think it was as well, actually. I
thought it was my computer.
I did too, Marla.
Plug my.
Yeah.
So I think his computer may have died. So I will text him, but there he's texting me. Battery, yeah. So he's off, but I think we'll end the recording. Just a second.